we will hold the policy around votes. My interpretation of I will ask for consensus on occasion. So Catherine, when I ask for consensus, if you could just raise your hand if you agree, or that way, yeah, perfect, we can see you good. That just so we're not doing roll call. I want to welcome everybody here today. We will go around the room real quickly. It is hybrid, so it may be a little bit clunky as we start out, and so we may have to backtrack once in a while. We'll see how it goes. For this particular meeting, I don't have to tell you all, we're dealing with a big precedent that has been set by the legislature with support of the governor around appropriations for Maine future. So the focus today is to ensure that we can have this money spent and allocated, hopefully allocated within this general fund, and there is no sweeping of these dollars. It wouldn't preclude the legislature from coming in and stopping the spending of any of these funds down the road with the new biennial budget. So we need to keep those things in mind. We also need to keep in mind, obviously, the fiduciary responsibility we have around spending. I know personally, the voices on projects in regards to not spending money on those in the past, and I will be that same voice in the future. So that being said, there is a big pent-up demand for these dollars and for projects. So I don't think we're going to have that kind of issue. So, Roger, before I do, I'm going to do introductions and then I'll come back to you, Roger. So, and off the record, please, you people are standing in the way of me leaving for a dog drive. So, my camper is hooked to the truck. My truck is full of dogs. So let's be expeditious here.
I think both bring the dogs in.
I should actually.
I like those little dogs.
I'd like to too.
Yeah.
I make a motion. Consensus.
So how exactly consensus, folks? What's that? Yeah, can everyone, Catherine, you can hear us because you're raising your hand.
Yeah, she just
perfect. And we do have a lot of people who have signed in today, and I can't see the computer. I'm going to ask everybody who is remote if they are just seeing lips move and not hearing voices to raise your hand, and staff will be able to see in case we have a technical problem from that standpoint.
I did see a message from Eliza Thompson that audio was poor. Okay, we can tune that up.
Sandy Moore, just raise your hand. Sandy must be having some problems. Sandy, if you could let us know if you're not hearing us.
It's getting better now. I couldn't hear you hardly at all before, but it seems to be a little better now.
Okay, I think that's going to be a good reminder because if we're off a laptop, we're all going to have to speak up and speak clearly. So
I can hear you now. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's go around the room with introductions, and then we'll kick this off, and I'll begin. My name is Pat Kelleher. I'm the Commissioner of Maine Department of Marine Resources and the Chair of LMO.
I'm Barbara Trafton from Brunswick, and I'm a public member of the board.
I'm Amanda Beal, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry.
I'm Jim Norris. I'm from Winthrop and a public member.
I'm Roger Burley, a public member from Cliff Island and Gaston Bay.
I'm Bob Myers, and a public member from Bath.
Don Kleiner, public member from Union.
I am Judy Camuso, Commissioner of Maine Fish and Wildlife.
Catherine?
Yep, Catherine Robbins Halstead, Searsmont, public member of the board.
Staff.
Sarah Demers, Director of Land for Maine's Future Program. Laura Graham, Senior Planner for Land for Maine's Future Program.
Jason Goulet, Senior Planner.
And we have some agency staff in the room. Could you just introduce yourself?
Ryan Robichaud, I'm the Wildlife Management Section Supervisor for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
I'm Bethany Atkins, I'm the land acquisition and habitat grant. I'm the Director of Planning and Acquisitions for the Bureau of Parks and Lanes.
Great. And I do want to recognize a new hire for the Department of Ag, Alex Redfield, who is taking Stephanie Gilbert's place. Are you on, Alex? He is on. Yeah.
I am. Nice to meet you all virtually.
Exactly. Welcome aboard, Alex. We look forward to meeting you in person at a future meeting. Are there any other agency staff online?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Steve Dixon, Bureau Director for the Resources and Information Planning part of DACF.
Good morning. This is Nancy McBrady. I'm the Bureau Director for the Bureau of Ag, Food and Rural Resources. And welcome, Alex. We're so excited to have you here.
Hi, everyone. This is Andy Cutco, the Director of the Bureau of Parks and Lands.
Good
morning, everyone. This is Judy East, Director of the Land Use Planning Commission.
Perfect. I didn't see you there. Okay. So I know we've got a lot of people from the public on as well. I'm not going to go through, have you introduce yourself, but at some point we will be taking some public comment.
Technical difficulties.
I had to sign off.
Okay. All right. So we had a little technical difficulties there, but that hiccup is over. Sandy, your hand is still up. I'm assuming that's up from the last time. If you could put it back down, please. Okay, we are clear there. So with that, I'm going to go. Roger, you had your hand up earlier before we get into the agenda.
Yes. Well, we've talked about this before, but you used the word spend 40 million. I like the word investment. Prefer the word investment.
That's a good reminder for me. Thank you, Roger.
And the second thing is I can barely hear some of these people.
Okay.
My problem probably more than this, but I really struggle.
Okay, we can move you up we'll move you up closer, Roger, if you'd like.
Well, I'm not sure.
I think we can turn down on that side.
I think I can max the volume here, actually. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, it's maxed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to close out of your email, okay?
As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, so, watch your language. One thing I have not had to do in quite some time, because it's been months and months since we've had anything in-person meeting, is just to remind you packages are in your folders, and if you could please submit those forms preferably by the end of the meeting, that would be great. The first item on the agenda is for a board vote to adopt a remote meeting policy, and Sarah has a few slides on this.
I'm getting there. Okay, so this last legislative session, Public Law 2021, Chapter 290, I'm not sure that's correct, requires the adoption of a remote participation policy. And the policy was included in your board packet, so hopefully you've seen that. In brief, the policy includes provisions that are required by law, including the fact that board members are expected to be physically present except for circumstances identified in the policy. Members of the public are to be provided a meaningful opportunity to attend by remote methods when board members participate remotely. An effective means of communication between board members and the public will be provided, and all votes taken during a remote meeting must be by roll call vote. The law states that the board can adopt a remote participation policy after notice and hearing. We did provide public notice through the states.gov delivery system with the option for written comments. We did not receive any comments. I have a draft motion here, and I think we should plan to take public comment if there is any.
Yeah, yeah. Any questions around the law or the policy?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we adopt the public meeting policy as drafted and put into effect immediately.
I second.
Motion by Barbara, seconded by Roger, to adopt the public meeting policy as it was drafted. Any questions or comments on the policy, Don?
Just a question, Mr. Chair. As you touched on earlier, we've lots of time to do things sort of by consensus around the room, and will this policy allow for that not motion item, but an item that we all just kind of go, okay, we should do that to proceed as we've been operating?
Yeah, I think under Robert's rules, the allowance of consensus, reaching consensus is allowed on items that do not need a motion. Okay. So it would be the chair's prerogative to either run those by consensus or through a vote. I think for the sake of time, we can dispense with a lot of this business by consensus, as long as there's no objection from the board.
I just wanted to preserve that because I think that makes us efficient.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions from the board before I go to the public? Are there any members of the public that have questions or comments around the policy for remote public meeting policy? Do you see any hands?
No.
There are no hands from the public. So back to the board. We have a motion on the table. I'm going to read it for the record. The motion is to adopt the public meeting policy as drafted and put into effect immediately. The policy shall be posted to the LMF website. We do need a roll call vote here for this particular one. So I'm going to go around the table and I'll start with Barbara.
Yay.
Commissioner?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. On the screen?
Yes.
Catherine, excuse me?
She said a yes.
She said yes.
Yep.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for that. Now we're going to move into kind of our regular business items in regards to projects to be acted on by LMS staff.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? Just
You may.
Wouldn't the minutes normally be inserted here?
Oh, yes, you're right.
Normally we would. I chose not to do that today just because I wanted us to focus our time and availability for bigger discussion. So
I'm good. I just thought it was an oversight and I knew I had them in my packet, so I was.
they're there, but we will adopt, my plan was to adopt them in November.
Okay, I'm fine.
Okay.
It's about a typo on page 8. I'm an occasional, this is Bob here. I'm an occasional user of that river trail instead of trail.
Okay.
You know, right?
Staff has made note of that, and we'll make changes for the November. Sorry.
Didn't mean to.
No. I'm glad you picked that up. The director did not tell me in our pre-meeting that she's done this, so I will.
Yeah, but I emailed you about it.
It wasn't the email.
I was busy doing some whale thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, item number 3, projects to be acted on, the St. George River project in Thomaston Water Access, and who's doing that?
That would be me.
The floor is yours.
All right, out of deference to you and your dogs, I'll try to do this quickly. So this one came to the board for preliminary approval relatively recently, but it's a 1-acre parcel on the St. George River in Thomaston. One thing I want to run the board through briefly. Next slide, Sarah. The light blue lines on this slide are the existing property boundaries. And if you look closely, you will see that a large portion of the neighbor's property, the backyard, is within the boundaries of this parcel. The plan is to, so the parcel is owned by DOT. DOT will convey to the town as is. Then the town and the neighbor will do a boundary line adjustment to set the boundary at that yellow line on the map. And the town will also grant to the neighbor a right-of-way, 15-foot wide right-of-way, to use the existing driveway that is right there on the town's parcel. And the appraiser was informed of this and did the appraisal as though all of that was already done. And the reason for that is that LMF's investment is going to be in the parcel to be retained by the town when all this is done. So we'll do, the order of operations is going to be conveyance from DOT to the town, boundary line adjustment and granted right away for the town and the neighbor, and then project agreement with LMF. But I wanted to make sure that that was all clear so that the board knew exactly what y'all were voting on today.
Any questions on that particular adjustment? Seeing none?
Thanks. Get that appraisal on, again, the parcel that's going to be retained by the town. And that was 90,000. The AOC met on September 3rd and voted to accept it without reservations. So we have our first draft motion here.
Great. I believe this was noticed. There was an announcement, right, of public notice on this particular parcel.
That's, yeah.
Oh, that's next.
That's next, yep.
That's next. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we do have a draft motion on the board around the St. George River. Any questions prior to a motion? So questions, you would entertain a motion.
The recommendation of the LMF appraisal oversight. The appraiser's value. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll move, this is Commissioner Kunso, I'll move to approve the recommendation of the oversight committee, appraisal oversight committee, and accept the appraiser's value of 90,000.
I second that.
We have a motion by Commissioner Camuso, seconded by Bob Myers. Just for, can you go back, please? Just so it's clear on the record. We're having trouble going
I think
back.
I can.
So it's clear on the record. The motion is to approve the recommendation of the AOC and accept the appraised value of 90K. Any questions on the motion? No questions. We will have a vote on the motion. We'll start with Barbara.
Yay.
Yes.
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 Catherine?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Back to staff.
Okay, so we did do public notice in the Chemic Journal on September 14th, and we received no comments.
So we now have,
Is there anyone participating who would like to comment?
well, we don't take comments after public comments at the end. So we can take comments outside of the scope of the announcement. Is there any member of the public who has any comments in general around this project?
No hand.
No hand raised. Back to the board. We have.
Well, so as has become a habit, when the appraisal is significantly different from the value in the initial appraisal, we just breakdown of what they originally requested and what they are requesting today. There's a letter in your board packet. The initial proposal estimated the land value at 50,000. The actual appraisal was 90,000. And so the town is asking that the award be increased proportionally, so to be half of the value. And DOT has also agreed to sell the property for 45,000. So the match would come in the form of that bargain sale, which we looked at all of our policies and statutes, and there is no problem with that. So that's the request. And so then I think on the next slide, draft motion with the final amount and then to the board's discretion.
Great, thanks. So back to the board. Barbara?
Mr. Chair, I will move to confirm the allocation of 45,000 in LMF water access funding to support the acquisition of the parcel subject to standard conditions.
Second.
Motion by Barbara, seconded by Roger. I'm going to read it into the record again to confirm the allocation of $45,000 in LMF water access funding for the acquisition of the parcel, subject to the standard condition. Any additional questions or comments on the motion?
Just, Mr. Chair, as on the first vote on this, I plan to recuse myself because it impacts my business directly.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that. So we will have one recusal as we go around the table. Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none.
Yay.
Yes.
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 Catherine?
Yes.
Perfect. We have a recusal with Don Kleiner, but the remaining votes are in the affirmative, so the motion passes. That's a great project. I'm sure Don will be able to raise his fees.
That's what he has in mind.
Okay, now we're getting into the meat of the agenda, where we're dealing with kind of the future and how we're going to be moving forward, both from an agency standpoint as well as staff standpoint within LMF. So item number 4 is the board allocation of funds for agency staff and contractors, and I will turn to Sarah.
Okay, I have tried to lay this out pretty systematically, so hang with me and don't hesitate to interrupt if you have questions along the way. And I apologize that my back is to you. I'll do my best to multitask here. So we know that the budget bill allocated $40 million for investments in land acquisition. And part of that language is that it ties these funds to the Land for Maine's Future Fund, which exists in statute. So it's saying this is a separate fund, but it's to be ruled the same way as all the laws that apply to the Land for Maine's Future Fund. And then we know that the budget bill also says that each expenditure under this part must be matched with matching funds as defined in the Land for Maine's Future Fund, at least equal to the amount of the expenditure. So that's sort of what we have for guidance on how funds can be spent. We also know that the LMF statutes state that consultants may be hired from the proceeds of the Land for Maine's Future Fund to assist the board in carrying out its responsibilities. So this is all the statutory framework that tells us that what we're about to talk about is kosher. Like, we're good to go. So the Land for Maine's Future program has a number of different funds. I've mentioned the Land for Maine's Future Fund, there's the Access to Maine Water Fund, there's this new Community Conservation Fund, and we also have donated funds. And funds may be used to we've determined that these donated funds, and just for context, probably 5 years ago or so, the Land for Maine's Future program was the recipient of a very generous donation from a gentleman who valued the program and made at his passing a very generous gift of close to $475,000. We've determined that those funds may be used to fund positions, and they may be used to match expenditures from the Land for Maine's Future Fund. We also know, did I hear a question?
No.
Okay. We also have determined that the Land for Maine's Future Fund, of which the Community Conservation Fund is a part of, may be used to hire contractors, and those expenditures must be matched. So we have donated funds, which can serve as match, and we have community conservation funds, which can be used and must be matched. So those are the two buckets of money we're pulling from and how they relate to each other. Now, I want to go through this. Please don't feel like you have to commit this information to memory. We will revisit this, but I just wanted to remind the board that we think of this as $40 million, but there are other costs. You can think of it as like overhead or operating costs. They're generally statutorily required things. State legal expenses, stewardship endowment contributions, that was a law that was passed this session, and inventories from the Natural Areas Program and Historic Preservation. So that money kind of, you have to think of it as coming off the top. And I've calculated what our average legal and inventory expenses are by category, just to give you a sense of like, okay, when we're talking about $30 million for conservation and recreation, about $1 million of that is going to be set aside for some of these operating expenses. Again, don't get too tied to memorizing these. I just wanted to put in your mind that like, oh yeah, it's a little less than $40 million. So when we do this sort of back of the envelope deduction, we've got about $35 million we're talking about investing. And when we look at that $35 million, we're talking about requests from the agencies to use a small portion of that to assist with the project cycle, whether it's bringing in projects, vetting projects, getting projects to closing. It's all related to the project cycle. And the proposals that we have before us today are for the Land for Maine's Future Fund, for the Land for Maine's Future Program, excuse me, to use the donated funds up to about $425,000 to increase capacity in the form of one senior planner for a 2-year period and a paralegal assistant also for a 2-year period. These are limited period positions. They last for a specific amount of time. And the numbers you see here are actual fully burdened rates coming from like our budget office. That's what they tell us it costs for those job classifications. Jim.
Yes, so these folks will be contractors to the agencies, but will they be, they won't.
These limited period positions will not be contractors. They will be limited period positions.
But they are to the agencies. Will the agencies be using them for any other sort of?
Well, I'm not to that point yet. So let's get to that point. So that's the donated funds. And the third topic, the third thing that will be used to fund is a web-based grants and data management system. We've been doing a significant amount of research on, based on a lot of the feedback we got from the work group on how can we make our grant process more efficient. And the solution that we came up with that we feel is the most cost effective is to transition to a web-based grants and data management system. We are very close to, we identified a top vendor, and I think if things move quickly, we can have something in place in the next 6 months or so. So would not be in effect for probably round 1, but in round 2, year 2.
I think, Sarah, just for clarity for Jim, these are going to be, the senior planner and the paralegal assistant will be within your shop.
Will be within LMF.
So
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just for clarity again, when you say a web-based grants program, after this first round, people would be applying online.
Yes.
Period.
Well, I don't want to say period yet, okay. But that I'm
that's
hoping like, yeah, that's the intent. Like there's probably a solution for folks who may not have internet access or something like that, but a major transition to that, yes. The next piece, so we have that $425,000, which would be available to match requests from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry and the Department of Marine Resources. DACF is requesting about $100,000 per year for 4 years, and DMR $75,000 per year for 4 years, which gets us to a total of $700,000. So we know that, and Jim, to your point, yes, these are contractors who would likely but may not work in the office. They could have a business offsite and could, have a scope of work, and this is what you are tasked to do.
Could these be companies that provide the kind of services rather than individuals?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Judy.
Sarah, can I just clarify that my agency, Fish and Wildlife, will also be in bringing on a contract staff person to assist specifically with our acquisitions programs. We have federal funding that will allow us to do that without requesting any additional monies from the LMF project. But it did occur to me while we were talking that I wonder if those monies could actually serve as match to the program.
I think that's something we could certainly work through.
Into that.
Yep.
Because it may just.
Yeah, that would be good.
Can I also just, maybe Sarah was going to say this, but just for clarification, the reason the number for DACF is higher than DACF is because we have both work to do with agriculture as well as BBL. So
Good clarification. Yep.
Yeah, and the DMR numbers, just for additional clarity there, that's up to 75. We're in contact with 2 different organizations right now about this particular work. And I would say we'll not exceed that. It may come in below it. The one thing that we're doing differently within the agency related to working waterfront, we're hiring a resource manager that works in coastal programs. So they will do a lot of the work within the agency, where in the past we had all of that work done outside of the agency. So, Jim?
Yeah, but is this on a bid basis contract portion, or is it at your discretion?
Yet to be seen, Jim, actually. We still have procurement rules that we have to follow here, and I'm not sure if we're going to have to do a bid process or not. So,
in any event, we'll be following procurement guidelines, whatever way we go.
Yeah, yeah. I like it when I can sole source.
Sarah, could you just review where we're going to get the match, and is it a one-to-one match that we have to come up with 700,000? Maybe we can use some of the federal funds, but if we can't, where are we?
Right. So we know we have whatever expenditures that come out of the donated fund. So that takes more than 50% of the required match off the table. We have existing staff time, so we know that we could potentially use Jason's position to match expenditures at DACF, because he's most likely to work on farmland projects and projects with BPL. So that would be an obvious way to line up the match, is the value of his time. Another suggestion is that of Commissioner Camuso, where they have contractors. So I have very little concern that we'll be able to generate match, whether it's through staff time. It's possible that BPL or DMR will bring in, some kind of additional funding, whether it's staff or, another funder who can provide admin time. Match is going to be a problem. I have no concern.
I think the DMR portion will be matched by staff that we're hiring. I don't think that salary's been matched or anything. So
yeah.
I think we'll be fine.
Yep.
So my question is actually a little different than any of those, and that is this big enough to get the job done? That's more my worry here, that we already have a small staff. And I know the agencies all help, but we're not talking about 25 people here.
Right.
And this is a pretty daunting task. And my concern would be that we didn't think big enough here because of how quickly this all needs to be delivered.
Yep. I can speak for the Land for Maine's Future program. 2 additional staff for 2 years is not enough. We will be working with Commissioner Deal to say we need FTEs. This is a really useful kind of stopgap measure to buy us some time for the budget cycle, but 2 years of staff time is not going to be enough to get us through.
But that's not, I hear you. I get that worry. That's not the worry I'm voicing here, is the immediacy and the size. I worry that 2 FTEs is not enough of a ramp up.
Should be 4 right now.
What I'm not the manager here. This is the board asking the manager the question, is that enough to get this job done? Because I look at it and go, I don't think you can.
When I look at and we're going to get into this after this component of the meeting. In drafting the funding options, I feel confident that this gets us through our first 2 years after we revisit the situation. I think current capacity with some added capacity, we can get through 2 funding cycles. It's then, we'll have to look at how quickly our project's moving and what kind of capacity do we need to make sure that things are moving at the pace we need them to.
And a different question, but sort of in the same vein. In light of how difficult it is to hire help right now.
Or get lunch delivered.
Well, I mean, I haven't talked to an employer this summer that didn't say, I don't have all the people I need. So you're not unique, and I'm assuming, I don't know, but I'm assuming state government is also not unique in that conversation.
It is a concern I have,
We
yes.
say we're gonna hire 2 people, what are the chances that they exist?
I can't speak for the other agencies. I do know the hiring that we've done over the last 6 months. I've been pleasantly surprised at the quantity and quality of the applications we received. Okay. I don't know if Judy and Amanda are seeing the same, but we haven't, at least I haven't felt that squeeze that you're talking about from other areas. I'm hoping that will be the case going forward.
Yeah, I certainly for fish and wildlife, law enforcement side, all of our other positions have been consistent for many cases in excess of what we see.
I would say I was on the hiring committee for the Bureau of Ag replacing Stephanie Gilbert's position. I think quantity was a little bit, we struggled with quantity, but not quality. So the applicants we did get were of a very high quality. So I hear you, Don. I have that in the back of my mind, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed based on the experience of
And it's really
others.
the same question asked just a different way is, if they don't show up, it's really not enough then.
Right.
I think what you'll hear, especially under the next agenda item, Dawn, from at least from the commissioners, is the need to be adaptive. And the 3 of us talked at length yesterday, in particular around the next agenda item, and the need to be adaptive. And I think the same holds true on staff.
Okay, I'm good. I just don't want
Want
us
to
to
hear the
start down a
conversation.
path and go, oh my God, we didn't think this through carefully.
Yeah. Barbara and then
To follow up on Don's point, which I think is a very good one, I think I like seeing the fact that we're already talking about a transition to FTEs for LNF, but I'm also sensitive to the 3 departments who have lost employees over the last 8 years. I'll go back 8 years. And as designated state agencies for all our projects, I'm hoping that as we, begin to amass the body of projects that need to be dealt with, that there'll be some consideration given at the department level to build back your capacity that we had formerly when we had that $50 million bond issue over a decade ago.
yeah, and I think we're all hoping that's well. Amanda.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and we've had those conversations internally. And I just, to speak to the numbers that we came up for contracted support for the aid for DACF, DMR. I mean, these numbers are our best educated guess right now, and I think similarly what Sarah is proposing for these additional positions, term positions within LMF, and back to Pat's point about it, we need to be adaptive. If this isn't the right mix, if this isn't the right formula, we can come back and have that conversation.
I might just add that. Can you speak up? Oh, sorry, yeah. So if I could just add that although I would agree, we would all prefer full-time positions, but right now, the contract positions do allow the agencies some additional flexibilities, particularly in that as long as the money is available and the board supports it, we don't have to wait for a rainy budget to hire more contract staff for people. So if we get 8 months down the road and realize we need to double or 4 months, whatever, we can do that with result with the support of the board. So that's provides a little more flexibility rather than having to wait for another full budget cycle.
Thank you, Judy. That's actually very helpful.
I guess a related question on the web-based data management. Is that, I don't want to say this is something out of the box, but is it something that's somewhat tried and true?
Absolutely.
So you're fairly confident you could bring that up to speed?
The product we're looking at now is currently being used in state government by NEMA, and they've had a very good experience with it. The benefit of that is that it's already been sort of tested by our OIT, and it's sort of a easier thing to get into than something that's brand new and different.
That was my concern.
Yep.
Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're hearing people online say they can't hear, and especially those further from the microphone, could you please all elevate your voices, use your best theater voice, remember this is for posterity, and speak accordingly. Thanks.
Dig deep, dig deep. Barbara.
Chairman, I move that to authorize the Land for Maine's Future program to utilize up to $425,000 in donated funds for the hiring of 2 limited period positions and for the development of a web-based grants management system.
Good. Motion by Barbara, seconded by Roger. Any additional questions or comments on the motion? Is there any member of the public that has a question or comment on the motion?
No hands raised.
No hands raised. Back to the board. I'm going to call the question, read it back into the record. The motion is to authorize LMF program to utilize up to $425,000 in donated funds for the hiring of 2 limited period positions and for the development of a web-based grant management system. This is a roll call vote based on our new policy, and I will turn it about.
Yay.
Yes.
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 Catherine?
Yes.
Excellent. The motion passes unanimously. And for the second motion, Commissioner Beal.
Yes, I'd like to move that to authorize up to $75,000 a year to the Department of Human Resources and up to $100,000 a year to the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry for contracted services associated with project development and completion. Funds will be paid from the Land for Maine's Future Community Conservation Projects Fund and will be matched 1-to-1 as described in an MOA between the LMF program and the agencies. I hope that was loud enough.
Motion by Commissioner Beal, seconded by Roger. Any additional questions or comments from the board? To the public, any questions or comments from the public on this motion?
No hands raised.
We have no hands. Back to the board, and I am going to read into the record. The motion is to authorize up to $75,000 a year for DMR, up to $100,000 for Department of Ag, Conservation, Forestry for contracted services associated with project development and completion. Funds will be paid from the Land for Maine's Future Community Conservation Projects Fund and will be matched 1-to-1 as described in the MOA between LMF and the agencies. This is again a roll call vote based on the policy. Barbara?
Yay.
Amanda?
Yes.
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 Catherine?
Yes.
Yes. We have we have a vote, so we have.
Woohoo!
Unanimous, we have a unanimous vote on the allocation of funds. Thank you very much. That's certainly perfect. That certainly will advance this process as we discussed. So thank you very much for that support.
I'm really glad you voted that way because it would have been awkward if you had.
Yeah, that is, you took a chance there. Moving right along to item number 5, which is discuss the announcements of the funding timelines. Sarah.
Okay, so again, I'm going to try to methodically walk us through this. We have 3 options. What I'm hoping to do is go through the 3 options, and you'll see I have like a high-level slide that kind of mimics what was in your board packet. There was a graphic, and then there was some written description. I'm going to try to stay at the graphic level, but if we need to go into the deep part, we can. Yes, Jim?
So the origin of the three options, is it you and commissioners or just you and the staff, just out of curiosity?
Yep, so it started with internally LMF staff, then broadened out to agency staff, then broadened out to commissioners. There was some discussion. I wouldn't say I presented exactly the three options to, as you're seeing them, but sort of conceptually to project partners and got their feedback. So it's sort of had some vetting internally, I would say.
Thank you.
Yep. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Once I go through the options, I was hoping to stop presenting so that the public can be part of the deliberation.
Yeah.
So what we have, high level here, three options that are fast acting and balance board interests. So we thought about what have we heard the board saying over the past year that they want to see, work group recommendations, staffing constraints, and agency feedback. We looked at other funding cycles. So what does the MNRCP funding cycle look like? What does the NACA funding cycle look like? What does Forest Legacy look like? Because we know that impacts capacity within the land trust community, but also within the state agencies. We got feedback from applicants and from landowners on timing. We've heard over and over again that working waterfront projects really are best when they start in the winter and they have, it's their downtime and can put applications together. We've heard from farmers that, summer is crazy. Don't ask us to pay attention to anything but our farm in the summer. So we took that information into consideration. State procurement guidelines. Some of these options were definitely vetted with state procurement. We got their feedback and tried to take that information into account. We were looking at expediency with needed programmatic updates and equitable and inclusive for as many applicant types as possible. And I think it's important to set the tone of the conversation that we recognize that none of these options are going to be perfect for everyone. This is really how can we balance everything that we have in front of us to come up with some options that people can live with. So please put on your compromise hat as you go into this conversation. Jim?
What does expediency with needed programmatic updates mean?
It means we hear on the one hand that we want a really fast acting aggressive schedule. And on the other hand, we know we've been through a year of hearing feedback from our applicant community on changes to the program, and you can't do both. You can't and responsive. It's just not possible. So we're trying to come up with a compromise that gets both done. I think you'll find that all options offer an almost immediate call for proposals. They all separate funding cycles for working lands and the conservation and recreation proposals, which allows state agency staff to balance workflow and effort. I think it will also do that for our applicant community as well. I'm going to talk more about that when we look at the options, but you'll see that they're all broken out the same way. We have an opportunity to prioritize shovel-ready projects, and again, I'll talk about that more. Each option offers 2 opportunities a year for submission of working forest projects through both the CNR and working lands categories. And all of the options offer predictability with the opportunity to make changes in year 2. So again, sort of balancing what Commissioner Camuso said, we're going to choose something. It does not mean we have to repeat it in year 2. We have the ability to be flexible to look back and kind of say, okay, what worked well, what didn't work well, what can we improve upon? We're hearing this, and so let's adjust accordingly. Okay, so here is high-level look at option 1. The table on the bottom is a calendar which starts in October, which is next month. This schedule keeps water access projects rolling. Conservation and recreation would be an October to May funding cycle with letter of intent in October, Applications due. Uh-oh. Oh, look, February, thank you. I had a mind blank there. And then the board awards in May. And then the working lands, again, that working lands includes farmland projects, working waterfront projects, and working forest projects. And those working forest projects that are submitted would use the same CNR workbook. It's just another opportunity to submit those projects. And when I talk about working forest, I'm thinking of projects that would be IF&W deer wintering area projects, forest legacy projects, USDA's Forest Services community forest projects, any kind of other working forest easement or working forest project. So we would provide those examples in the workbook to give guidance to applicants.
So those are not strictly limited to agency.
Correct. Yep. Yep. All of these in the conservation and recreation call for proposals, we would be looking at receiving statewide significant projects and community conservation projects. So those are the two funding categories you would see in the green submission phase. Before I go into the pros and cons, any questions from folks? Yes.
Sarah, can I just add, and you mentioned it, but I just want to remind folks that the three options we're reviewing right now are for right now. And we just approved funding for additional capacity for LMF staff and for the 3 agencies. So very likely what we approve right now will change. I mean, we anticipate, well, right now we don't have those people on board right now. It's going to take a little, hopefully not too long, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get those staff on board and kind of familiar with the program and kind of in their full screech mode ahead. So whatever we approve today, I fully anticipate is going to be different once we have, the new LMS staff capacity and the agencies all have different capacity. So I don't want people to, I'm hopeful that people are understanding that we're considering this sort of an adaptive management, the Fish and Wildlife term, approach to project management, and that what we work through today and approve today is for the short term. And if Sarah and other staff come back in 6 months and say we get people in and up and running, we want to propose a new cycle.
Yeah.
Then we'll do that.
Right. So to clarify, whatever we agree to today, we're going to publish a workbook and we'll talk about that. That will be set for that workbook. Right. You can always publish another workbook in 6 months, as Judy said, and do another one. So yes.
Yes. Yeah, will we be using the ranked choice voting?
That would be a no.
Yeah. I might go into dictator mode.
So Sarah, just to be clear, deer yard could come in under the CNR in October.
Yep.
Or it can wait and come in January. Working lands is a new category, just to give us that second option.
That's right. This breakout represents trying something new, a new way to sort of balance flow, recognizing that we don't have all the staff on board right now. And so let's stage this so that we can get one group working and kind of humming along, and then we can get the next group working.
I believe, and Commissioner Beal can correct me, this will give you the opportunity to develop the new ag easement program.
Yes, yep, the fund. And so I think, we're really motivated and we'll work on that and we can get there sooner. But I think this does allow us the time we need.
So in your worksheet, in your board packet, there were pros and cons. I chose to highlight the pros. This is a very fast acting, equitable for all applicant types. Both state agencies and land trusts and municipalities are all coming in together. It creates a predictable funding cycle for all. We talked about it separating conservation and working lands, which reflects feedback to prioritize working lands from some of our work group participants.
So to touch back to my previous question, because this one really front loaded pretty heavily. And you're not gonna have that staff on board immediately. Are we gonna bury you?
This is not all that different than a typical call for proposals. This is the staff we have had for the last call for proposals. I'm not worried about year 1. I'm worried about year 3.
I'm good.
Don't tell them.
Can I just throw something that I didn't hear that that was part of our discussion is that our thinking at the staff level has been year 2 looks a lot like this, that, you know, come next fall, we're doing the same thing all over again. So that there's this annual repeating cycle.
Right. Whether it's in October or September, or, you know, like the timing of it might be a little bit different depending on, but this sets up a nice predictable workflow.
We're using terms like year 1 and year 2, so for my benefit, maybe you could clarify what that means. So I thought the appropriation was based on fiscal years, so July 1st to June 30th, 2022. So
the funds are entirely deposited in the account, so we don't have to wait for the fiscal cycle. We aren't waiting for funds to land before we issue a call for proposals. The budget language does talk about $10 million a year. So I'm not convinced we have to tie that to a fiscal year.
It might be good to clarify that.
Yep.
I have been thinking in my own mind that the monies were made available in July, which was the beginning of this fiscal year. So it just would be good to clarify, because we're bound not to spend more than, to invest more than 10 million.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I would ask for that clarification.
So I can read to you. It says no more than 10 million of the funds may be spent in the first year by the department, and no more than 10 million plus any unused balance from prior years may be spent by the department in each of the subsequent years.
And I hear that, and I'm just wondering what a year is. So just a clarification would be interesting and helpful.
Jim?
Yeah, I think it's the appropriate time to ask this question, but I remember asking Sarah way back, everything involved, that there was nothing to prohibit us from committing, not spending, but committing additional funds early, you know, early in the first year, second year, whatever, as long as we didn't invest them. How does that play into this? I mean, is it, you said we're doing these on a year-by-year basis. So does that mean that we're not going to commit for some project early in the process? It's going to actually spend the money, say, in the third year?
I think that is a conversation we're going to want to have when we adopt the workbook. The board can decide if they want to say we're issuing a call for proposals and we'll entertain up to $20 million in requests, or, you know, if the board wants to put a number on it, they can, but they don't have to. It's not a decision we have to make at this point.
It seems to me that you've got to think long and hard about that for the turnaround time for some of these projects, and hope that some of them don't die on the vine waiting for a commitment. So I hope we strongly consider that.
We have some recommendations when we get to the workbook section.
Okay.
It would be my druthers to ensure that we have a way to obligate future dollars. Right? I mean, but to your point, projects that need money sooner rather than later need to be waived.
Yeah, and like I said, we've thought of that too.
Yeah. They're catching on.
So just to clarify, at least my reading of the budget, we can obligate, so let's just say we as a board obligate $8 million between now and next June. But the projects still have to work through some due diligence, that sort of thing. in that following year, we could actually obligate and invest, fully pay out $18 million.
That's right.
Right, so just keep that in mind. So I agree, we need to move expeditiously, and, but the first step will be to make commitments to those projects as soon as we can. And when they get sort of final payment will depend on the project cycle.
Yep. Okay, folks are generally comfortable with option 1. Okay, so I'm gonna skip some of the down in the weeds information, but know that we have it, we're prepared for it. And go to option 2. So option 2.
Excuse me.
Oh.
Is there any reason that we didn't highlight some of the cons during this discussion? There's one that's really important to me, a con that we didn't touch on, and that was does not allow for state projects to be submitted on a rolling basis.
Right. So that none of the options allow state projects to be submitted on a rolling basis based on feedback we got from our procurement division. So I met with procurement. Procurement is the arm in state agency that allows us to enter into a contract and move money from LMF to our applicants. And they have a lot of rules that we have to work around. And
work with.
Oh, sorry, work with.
No, that's the right word. That was the right word.
That was a total Freudian slip. Work with. And they are the ones who get you your money in the end. So we keep them happy.
You said applicants as opposed to agencies.
Agencies are applicants as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, good.
Yeah. So the feedback from procurement was that they didn't like a rolling basis because, so there's 2 different issues. They don't like the rolling basis because procurement is really all about a competitive process. That is what they promote, whether you're contracting, whether you're buying staples, or you're awarding LMF money. They want to see a competitive bid process. That is what they favor. And the rolling deadline does not promote that competitive process. So that is one reason why they don't like rolling submission.
So can I just add, Sarah, like just a reminder that the procurement staff are obligated to follow state law.
Yeah. And
those are laws that the legislature passed. So those are the statutory requirements of the state agencies. It's not just that it's something that it's a preference or that staff are willy-nilly making changes to these rules. Like that those are laws, and if we want to change them, we would have to go back to the legislature to make those changes.
Yep. Yeah. Sorry. That's helpful, Judy. I think it's really good because I think, procurement is our friend. They help us get money to our applicants.
Unless you try to work around it.
Yeah, unless you try to work around it. Absolutely.
And they are human.
They don't like that. So that's issue 1. The other big issue that we heard and procurement did not like was separating state agencies from land trusts or other eligible applicants. So in the past, statewide significant was only eligible to state agencies. The law changed with this budget bill, and state significant is now eligible for all applicants. And procurement said you can't segregate eligible applicants. If it's eligible to everyone, then everyone needs a fair shot at the funds. So that is why you don't see an state agency only option. We did in option 2 separate out state significant from CNR and working lands. So that's what option 2 represents. This would be an opportunity for the board to just prioritize those projects of a statewide significance. And to remind you, statewide significant projects in the past have been things like Mount Kineo, Cutler Coast, those things that are like, we all know them and love them, things that we can all immediately recognize as being just amazing assets.
Sarah, I remember on my prior time, I scratched my head every time we made a determination of what was significant and what was local, and, Roger might have felt that one was statewide, and I would say no, and it was kind of loosey-goosey to me, and perhaps during that mini round it was clearer, but I always was concerned that a lot of projects were misclassified, and we really didn't have a handle on properly classifying as state significant versus community and so forth. But I think if you're more comfortable.
I feel comfortable with the criteria we've developed. Whether each of you apply those criteria the same, I can't say, but if we stay in the criteria that the feature that you're promoting as state significant should be in a published report, that's a pretty, good criteria. You can determine whether that's true or not.
Thank you.
Okay, option 2. In year 1, we have state significant, a very condensed, this would be like shovel-ready projects that are under contract and ready to close, or maybe close between the time of application and the time that the board selects them. We're talking like right now projects. And that's reflected in the very short turnaround time. It retains the working lands schedule starting in January, and I think it extends it a little bit longer, gives a little bit more time for applicants to respond. And then it pushes the CNR request out to May of 2022. The sort of the flip side of the waiting until May is that buys the board time to really fully revamp the workbook and incorporate as many of the suggestions, kind of go through the whole process of the work group recommendations and vetting those and adopting those and having a workbook that it sort of reflects a lot of the work that we've been through over the last year and a half. So that's the compromise there. State significant projects are funded quickly. Community conservation and projects have to wait. So it's not a like one is better than the other. It's just another option.
Sarah, a question to you and to the other agencies. Are we aware of any statewide significant projects?
Yes.
Yeah.
That could close by January.
Yes.
So in your conversations internally, I don't think we talked about it as commissioners. Is there an opportunity to take statewide significance and roll it into option 1 as well, as a hybrid option 1?
Potentially, I could see that happening.
Yeah. Let's hold on to that.
Yep.
Thought then.
Yeah.
I'd ask a kindergarten level question. Barbara mentioned something about this earlier, but what is the fiscal year? Is it October 1 to September 30? Is it July 1 to?
July 1.
Okay,
Yep.
sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's roll.
That is option 2, with more details available if we need them. Option 3, again, this is pretty similar to option 1. The primary difference is that it pushes the working lands out until March. So it buys a little bit more time for the Farmland Access Protection Program primarily to get their program up and running and established. But it keeps the CNR schedule the same as option 1. We recognize that this may be a compromise that doesn't work well for Working Waterfront. Working Waterfront has pretty consistently preferred to operate in a like solid winter time frame. And really March may be getting late for farmers as well, but we wanted to give another option. The other con from a workflow perspective is that there's pretty significant overlap between the heavy duty working components of the CNR cycle and the working land cycle. So it could be a more challenging option for LMF staff to manage just that kind of overlap. So I'm happy to stop sharing if the board feels like there's added.
I think before we go to the board, I would like to receive some additional public comment on these options. We do know that our partners have raised a lot of issues associated with the timing and a desire to get money out as quickly as possible. So I think it would assist the board in our decision here this morning to receive some public comment on this. So is there any member of the public who would like to question or comment, make a comment on any of the options that have been presented?
Trying to.
No hands raised yet. Oh, here we go. Shelby Rousseau.
Hey there, this is Shelby.
Okay, Shelby, go ahead.
Could you just clarify the CNR portions? Sarah, it looks like on option 1, CNR is October through May, and then on option 2 would be May through June. So that's 1 month versus several months of preparation and submittal, correct?
In option 2, yes, it is a very short application period for statewide significant projects only. That would be like October to January. The board would be making decisions. So that is for statewide significant projects only. It would not be eligible for community conservation projects.
But in option 2, the community conservation projects, I wrote down May through June. Is that correct?
No, it is May through January.
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Wrong day. Yep.
Jeff Romano also has.
Jeff Romano, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Commissioner. I don't have a lot to add. I think this excited to see these timelines. The one suggestion I would make, and I think you just made it recently, Commissioner Kelleher, was some sort of hybrid. I think if there are statewide significant projects that are ready in the wings, I think it would be good to add that to option 1 to try to get some projects closed sooner rather than later. The way the legislation's written, we're on a fiscal year track, and that option 1, we're not going to spend any of the $10 million in the first fiscal year under option 1. So I think if there are statewide significant projects that are ready, I think adding that to option 1, the way it's written, not changing any other elements of option 1, I think that would be a great addition to that option to get the ball rolling. Thank you.
So I'm just going to recap. Jeff's suggestion is to amend option 1 to include the very short, very fast state significant portion of option 2. Okay. Reiterating the comment previously made by Commissioner Kelleher.
Any other hands?
Jerry Bly had his hand up. It's gone now. I don't know if he.
Jerry, I'll come back to you if you have any. Jerry, go ahead.
Jeff already stated what I was going to state, so I didn't feel I needed to say more.
Jerry gets extra points for any applications he's dealing with to help me get to my dog trial. Any other hands? We've had a question from staff.
Yeah, I'll start along the same lines. Sarah, I just wanted to clarify on option 1 to make sure that statewide significant projects fell within the CNR and the work plans categories. We may have answered that question a slightly different way with what folks were suggesting, but it just wasn't stated here, and I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Conservation and recreation applications include, in the past, they included state significant, regional, and local. They now include state significant, community conservation.
Okay, good. Any other hands?
No.
Back to the
Wow.
board. I think I'd like to entertain a motion. Judy?
I will move that the board adopt option 1 with the Kelleher amendment to include statewide significant projects as they are outlined in option 2.
Can we, I
I'm-
think for the sake of transparency, get the motion up and modified? Modified.
Well,
You lost the motion.
Might be hard to do.
I'm not sure why it's not allowing me to advance the slide.
The slideshow isn't being shared at the moment, just so you know.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Okay.
That'd be wonderful when it works.
Yeah.
We all have stories.
So,
Mine involves a chart plotter and a foggy day.
Oh, God. Okay, I'm gonna try this again. Let's see if we can get back to the slides. Okay, we're not in slideshow mode,
No,
but
not yet.
I think that's okay for now, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this is the draft motion
So
that Judy just read.
Yep.
How do you want, what,
So to adopt the funding cycle as described in option 1, to include
statewide significance. from
Statewide
option two.
Including proposals statewide.
Is that as-
October
as-
through January.
October through January
Yeah, perfect.
for one funding cycle until funding bursts come into April. All proposals until all funds from LMS future community conservation project funds have been committed.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Don Kleiner is seconding that motion from Commissioner Crusoe. Any, we do have questions, Bob?
Well, I'm going back to what Commissioner Caruso so eloquently stated about, this is just kind of getting us going here for the first 6 months. And to that end, although I like to affirm the board's commitment to call for additional proposals, an annual call is not even what we're doing here. You know, we're doing more than an
Right.
annual call. So I think that under describes what our
I think that's a really.
So
motivation
do you want to
is
say
to
like
assure
commitment to a consistent call for proposals or
Just
regular?
an ongoing
ongoing
call.
call for proposals?
Board's commitment to a call for proposals, you can just move, strike the word in.
Well, or
But I
you
think
put-
we need-
you could put scheduled in,
Yeah.
which would make it appear as though we're.
there you go.
Yeah, we're
I'm
tending to
comfortable
repeat this
with that.
process.
If we say ongoing, I worry that it gets back to that like rolling all the time perception that we can't
So
do.
so a friendly amendment then, is that a friendly amendment that would be accepted by the
Yes.
I can
second?
do that.
Wait a minute, what are we
We're just
saying?
going to amend the motion to read, to adopt the funding cycle as described in option 1, to include an amendment,
But also,
including statewide significant projects from October to January for one funding cycle, and to affirm the board's commitment to a scheduled call for proposals until all funds from the LMF's future community conservation project funds have been committed.
strikes annual and gives us more flexibility.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what does to a schedule call or.
Well, so the schedule as outlined
Option
in the.
one has a schedule
So-
associated with it.
Yeah, so these have a schedule, we got the letter of intent and the application
Or-
is due, so according to the schedule that we outlined, as opposed to ongoing, meaning people can just send in applications whenever.
But do we in my mind, are we saying 2 additional scheduled calls for proposal? That's what we're saying, right? That we are committed to additional scheduled calls for proposals.
And I think our intent to carry that further is to, as soon as this one gets going or partway through, we're going to schedule the next one.
Right, and I think that's important for our minutes to reflect that, because the conservation community, we know, because a survey was done, we know we have some shovel-ready projects that are going to come in. But we want to attract new applicants who basically have not made an application before, may need more help from their designated state agencies, municipalities who haven't gone through the process. They need to know that in this coming year, if they don't make it for February,
Right.
they're going to get another chance before the end of, I'm going to say now, calendar 2022.
Let's, because we have a motion on the floor, let's come back to that statement, Barbara.
Okay.
Read it and have you make it affirmative statement for the record that we can have consensus on after we do this, just so it's going to be clear in the minutes and reflect the intent of the board. So, are there any additional questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, I'm going to attempt to read into the record this motion as amended. So the motion is to adopt the funding cycle described in option 1, modified to include statewide significant projects that will, as described in option 2, October through January, for one funding cycle, and to affirm the board's commitment to an annual call for proposals. Sorry. And to affirm the board's commitment to a scheduled call for proposals until all funds from the Land for Maine's Futures Community Conservation Project funds have been committed. This is a roll call vote per policy, and I will turn to Barbara.
Yay?
Yes.
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 Catherine?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think we have set a really strong course for the funding cycles here for future investments to be made by the Land for Maine Future. And I do want to point out during the course of the budget conversations, and then finally having the budget passed by the legislature and then signed by the governor, several of us had the bill signed. And this budget, this biennial budget that was just signed into law by Governor Mills, had many, many components, many, many investments, right? I mean, there was a lot of groundbreaking investments being made in the state of Maine, but it was interesting. The governor was incredibly emotional and talked more about this particular program than any other item that was within the budget. And I think this motion that just passed certainly reflects her commitment to this program. So appreciate the work of the board on this. So with that, I'm going to turn to Barbara to come back to the statement that she made earlier.
I've forgotten it.
Just that we're going to commit to providing additional opportunities, particularly for smaller land trusts, so that if they're not ready right now, they will have another opportunity.
What I wanted to assure them that they should be working right now and getting going, because there will be another opportunity. So maybe it could be something like the motion would be to affirm the board's commitment to offering, or if Sarah wants to say it, to another scheduled call within the calendar 2022 year.
I would say we don't need that as a motion, as long as there is strong consensus of the board to confirm the position and the commitment of the board for an additional scheduled round of proposals within the CNR. For
Next
CNR.
3 calendar years, fiscal.
Pardon me?
I'm just wondering if we want to go beyond 22.
To say we'll do at least 2 a year.
Or for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the minimum that we should be looking. I would say that's a minimum.
Right.
If we get staff on board and we can move with greater speed and efficiency, but I would say a minimum of 2 year.
For the-
2
I
years.
understood.
For the
that
next
to
3
be part
years.
of the motion.
Yeah. Is there clarity of the board on the statement by Barbara and the commitment by this board? Seeing heads, we have consensus on that statement, and let's ensure that the statement is adequately reflected, so our partner groups will be able to understand exactly the board's commitment.
Would you like me to restate it? Would that be helpful? Or are we good?
I think we just did.
Okay.
I think we just did.
And Pat, before we move on, Betsy Ham from Maine Coast Heritage Trust had raised her hand.
Oh, she did.
She,
Okay.
she typed a question in the chat.
Okay.
She asked, she said, did I understand the statewide significance in this option could include working forest lands?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, that was a big one. Thank you very much for that. We are now moving on to item number 6, which is workbook updates. By moving to option 1, obviously we're foregoing a lot of major workbook changes and moving in the direction of just the changes that need to be made based on the statutes that have just passed. So I will turn over to Sarah.
Right, so where do we go from now? Now that we know we're going to be issuing a call for proposals, the board has to adopt a workbook. I'm going to go through those changes that, as Pat said, we know we are making due to changes in law. A couple that board feel are important, the staff feel are important to accomplish. And then we're going to just sort of lay out the okay, what happens next? What are we doing here? And we're also going to talk about project readiness, which I think is going to be important. You just adopted a schedule that allows state significant projects to apply from October to January, October to June as well. So you're going to have to differentiate between which ones you select in January and which ones you select later. And I think that project readiness piece is going to be important in making that distinction. So that's what we got next. Workbook updates. We know that we have to change the state significant category to include both agencies and cooperating entities. We're going to replace the local and regional categories with a single community conservation category. That will likely be both sort of like text in the workbook, but as well as reflected in the scoring. We're going to prioritize projects that help adapt to a changing climate. That was part of the budget bill. That will be part of the workbook. And something we need to talk about is whether that will be reflected in the scoring or if it will be reflected in tools available to the board to help them analyze how significant is this project? Is it a high sort of climate friendly? Is it medium? Is it low? You know, there are different ways we can do it. It doesn't have to be through scoring. I've already started conversations with the Natural Areas Program. They have provided consistent natural resource feature maps for the last 2 funding rounds. We can work with them to update that map set so that you have not only is there a, wading-bird and waterfowl habitat on the property, but how does this property help assist with climate resilience? So that's one tool. I already started that conversation to give the board a jump start on that. We're going to need to update the deer wintering area requirements and scoring. Again, that's workbook and scoring change. And IF&W is here today and they're going to talk to us a little bit more about that. We need to update the budget to reflect the 5% stewardship contribution. That'll be a workbook and budget change. And we need to revise the workbook in this initial round to include only CNR and water access projects. We will do a separate workbook for working waterfront and farmland access protection when those cycles start. So just focusing on CNR and water access. And here's the shorter list of things that staff would like to change. It's important to note this, we recognize there's a much longer list of things that we've contemplated and talked about. This is like the very realistic short list that we think we can get to. revise a project budget form to, for clarity and simplicity that also incorporates all of the other budget changes that we mentioned on the previous slide that have to be done. Consolidate the location of due diligence requirements into one single location in the workbook. That was based on feedback we heard from the work group. Reword the signage requirement to explicitly require display of the signs provided by LMF. We're finding that not all applicants are meeting this requirement, so we want to state it specifically and very clearly what that is. We think it's important to update the appraisal standards to reference the most recent version of use path at the time of application so that we're not referencing an old standard. That doesn't make any sense. And just go through and ensure internal consistency throughout the workbook. So making sure that we're consistent with ourselves throughout.
Sarah, can I ask a question?
Sure.
There was a policy from a previous board that applicants could only apply for 50% of the appraised land value.
Right.
But prior to that, applicants had been allowed to apply for 50% of total project costs.
Right.
And wouldn't it be timely to also decide what this board would like to do going forward so that applicants will know they could have either option if they chose to? Is that part of what needs to?
I would advocate that we do not change that for this first funding round. The big issue, I think that will be much easier to do when we have our web-based grants management system. The challenge is we don't have a way to document match that is like a soft cost. We don't have a way to keep track of and report out on a match that's provided by the cost of an appraisal, the cost of a survey, or legal expenses. What we have to do is retain a paper copy, whether it's electronically in our file, and then if somebody says, show me the match for this project, we're digging through files. And that's why I would recommend at this time we don't make that change, that we keep it the 50% appraised value for this first round and address that when we have tools that allow us to manage it.
And the timing of that new tool is
6 to 9 months is the hope.
So we would have that in place before our second call for community conservation projects. And that would be my concern because I think a lot of new applicants, smaller applicants,
need
50% of the total project, and we have the funds now to encourage them. So as long as you will put that on.
I will commit to having a system in the next round, whether, we have to figure it out.
Yep, great, thank you.
We have a hand up.
Okay.
Jeff Romana.
Jeff.
Thanks, Commissioner. I don't know if Sarah, if you've gone through all your list, but two other changes that I think are worth considering in the workbook is there's one that talks about access improvement grants. Right now it says 2% of LMF grant award where the statutory limit's 5% of appraised value. I think the board should consider changing that back to what the maximum is.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jeff. I had assumed that the board would revisit all those set asides and didn't put it in the slide. So thank you.
Okay. The other one I think you may want to think about changing is the project structure category that was added last time that put an emphasis on conservation easement as a structure and also with municipal approval as sort of a next tier. I think valuing projects that have a municipal letter of support or municipal funding should get the top value in the project structure, whether it's conservation, easement, or fee ownership. Just a suggestion that I think you should consider. Thank you.
I only could hear part of that because I'm guessing both of these.
Restate. Okay. Jeff's first recommendation was to revisit the set aside amounts, which I agree completely and had assumed we would do.
Yeah.
And that's that the board votes to set aside a percentage for legal expenses, a percentage, all those sort of like all other expenses I went over in the beginning. The board sets that as part of the allocation process. So it's not germane to, we'll have to clarify that for the workbook, but it's more important when you're making awards.
Yeah. Okay.
The second suggestion was to reconsider the portion of the workbook that prioritizes easements over fee lands. And honestly, I have to look back at the workbook and remember how that affected scoring. I think it was a minor point. It was not a significant amount of points.
So our October 4 meeting, you're going to bring the revised workbook back to us, correct?
Well, we have to vote on an October. We have to assume, I haven't vetted with everyone that they're available October 4th.
Okay.
So we have to.
So the
And I
second
think-
part of the Jeff's comment was the municipal.
That was tied into that. Yeah, that was tied into that part.
So I'm just gonna offer that we've just committed to significant changes, and I think that commitment came with an understanding that we were gonna minimize changes to the workbook right now, and that all of these discussions are going to delay. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have them, but I'm not sure that it rises to the prioritization right now.
Which actually, thank you, Judy, brings me to the point I think I was going to make is, let's talk about process, because we just committed to having this workbook done in October.
Right.
Yeah.
It's already the end of September.
Right.
Yeah.
We're talking about like 1 week.
Right.
So my question was really going to be who and how quickly.
So I
Do
think.
we need to, as a board, go through this? Do we need a committee of this board to go through this? Can the staff do this? And then if it is a staff question, quickly.
So Aaron and I have talked about that as being able, the staff being able to have these particular workbook updates, including the first point that Jeff brought up, because they are reflected in statute, done for what we are proposing as an October 4th bird season meeting.
I can make it.
I'm not here.
As luck would have it.
Not here.
I am
Can you
available
participate
October 4th.
remotely?
No, I'll be
I already have the meeting date in my calendar.
I can make
somewhere between DC and.
So that is the time frame we're looking at, early October.
So
And I think your point is, what we have proposed already is tight.
So my recommendation is to the board is to guide the staff to make the statutory changes necessary to the workbook. And the first part of Jeff's recommendation for the 2.5 to 5 was required in statute. And everything else gets put on hold until we get this first round out. And I'm not saying that we can't have those conversations, but we could spend 3 days talking about those things. So let's make the statutory requirements minor modifications to the workbook and get working.
And I wouldn't say put them on hold, Judy, I
No,
agree with you.
yes.
But Catherine and I have volunteered for the workbook subcommittee, so
Right.
I think we need to activate that subcommittee immediately and be working on those issues and get it back to the
Yep.
board. And the other thing I would say, maybe to Don's point more, is I'm comfortable that the staff can provide language to incorporate the statutory changes and the other things we've talked about. And probably we need to approve that, but that'll shorten everything.
Yes,
and give us the language.
That's the process I was envisioning as well, is that we would be providing you a draft that you could like look at over the weekend. Next weekend in time for a very early October adoption. So yes. And I did want to talk about project readiness, because I think this is going to be critical for the board if you are looking at sort of 2 consecutive cycles. That's basically what you adopted, is like one super fast and one like regular fast. So project readiness, I think this is going to be probably the defining thing that determines whether you're in the super fast round or if you're in the regular fast round.
If you need 9 months to complete your project, you're not in the super fast round.
Exactly. And so we've come up with some suggestions. Project readiness has always been a consideration. We've always had criteria in there looking at project readiness. This specifies that, you know, we want to see something that's under contract by the time the board meets to review proposals. For easement projects, include a draft easement that meets LMF's requirements with the proposal. Your matching funds should be secured by proposal selection. If funds are not in hand, describe funding efforts. Appraisal to LMF standards submitted with the proposal or has been ordered and is expected no later than proposal selection date. And I think you can use these criteria. I think we can word these so that it applies to both rounds, whether you're looking to close in 4 months or you're looking to close in 14 months. These still apply depending whichever track you choose.
And to Jim's point that he brought up earlier, I mean, this is really speaks to the issues around obligating or investing.
Right.
A question regarding the appraisal. We've had a number of preliminary appraisals that were submitted early on. Syslinopsis, for instance, there was an appraisal that needed updating and appeared to be substantially changed because of the pandemic and real estate values. That it seems like this could be a deal breaker for a lot of people. You know, a lot of the appraisals are booked way out, less appraisals that maybe we could qualify that to mean some sort of less than complete appraisal, but still giving us a solid indication of what kind of numbers we'd be looking at. Because I have a hard time believing that there's enough appraisers and availability if there's that pent-up demand. Heard through the grapevine that a lot of appraisers just not available. Talk to me in a year, or we're 8 months out or something.
So option 1 is October with proposals being selected in May. That buys some time to get your appraisal in by May. I'm sensitive to what you're saying, that they may not all be in that time, but it does give us an indication of who's really ready to go and who's not quite there yet.
Okay.
I think applicants who have worked with LMF in the past, and for those that are new, will find that LMF staff are always looking to help find a solution. So if you find that you are somewhere in between, let us know and we'll work with you to figure it out.
Your laptop is dead, but we are online. So
Very good. Good problem solving, Laura. How much battery does your phone have?
About 50%, we're good.
I do want to go back to the public on this issue around project readiness. Do we have any members of the public who would like to comment on this particular item?
Give Laura a second to navigate her phone.
Yeah.
Nobody's showing up. Can we give them permission to unmute themselves and speak up? Because I'm not 100% confident I'll see.
Yeah, so we've had a little technical difficulty here. So if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on the issue of project readiness within the workbook, please feel free to speak up because we may not be able to see your hand.
I can stop sharing too.
I am not hearing anybody, so back to the board. We have, I don't think you've got anything else on the workbook, do you?
We do have a brief presentation from IF&W. This
is it associated with the workbook?
Yes, because the workbook includes scoring for deer wintering area, and IF&W will be involved with developing the scoring for the deer wintering area, because
Okay.
that has to be the term is prioritized, and we do that through scoring.
I'll hold a turn and have Devin.
Want me to run the slides for you, Ryan?
Sure, yeah, that would be great. And is it okay if I sit over here, or do folks want me up front?
You're fine right there, Ron.
And I'll keep it brief, Commissioner Kelleher, knowing that you have a
commitment.
Scheduled afternoon event. We've been asked to come in and talk about Public Law 2021, Chapter 409, which was enacted to preserve deer habitat in Maine, passed as an emergency measure. I thought it'd be good to touch base or to revisit the 2011 bond language, which created a nexus with deer wintering area habitat through the LMF program. Touch on Chapter 409 and the changes in statute that has an impact to the program. And then inform the board a little bit about what the department's done to date in our approach to help achieve the conservation goals identified in that law. The 2011 bond directed the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry and the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to pursue priority deer wintering area projects through LMF. It required lands being considered as priority deer wintering areas to be managed using protocols developed by the department and what we typically work with on private landowners engaged in deer winter habitat management. And it also set standards to define what those priority areas might be, including size in terms of the acreage, historical use or current use of deer within those deer yards, as well as the ability or capability of the land to provide that winter shelter through time. Next slide.
So the bond was very specific.
It was, and there was a scoring matrix that was developed and incorporated into the workbook, allowing up to an additional 10 bonus points to be allocated for those projects that met that criteria. And the criteria was based on the ability of the landowner to commit to managing for deer wintering habitat, as well as enter into a habitat management agreement with the department to ensure that connection and connectivity through time in terms of management of those lands. It did have a description of the size thresholds in terms of what the LMF board would consider as priority deer wintering area project in their consideration of the proposals. Documented historical, current, or potential future use was a consideration. Geographic location within the state of Maine, northern, eastern, western Maine. The organization or the applicant's capacity to manage the land as functioning winter shelter. Consideration of the landscape context in terms of, for that proposal that was brought forward, what percentage of a functioning deer yard would that project impact, as well as some consideration of adjacent conserved lands or connectivity on the landscape regarding travel corridors and other stand-specific needs of deer to persist through the winter. And then interactions with the department to determine and confirm the significance of that deer yard to allow the board to be comfortable with those areas that were selected. Switching over to Public Law 2021, Chapter 409, a little bit of change in direction in that it directs LMF to give preferential consideration to certain projects important for the conservation of deer habitat in Maine. And it defines those certain projects fairly broadly as lands determined by the department to be of importance geographically, northern, eastern, western Maine. And it also created a nexus for the department to hold an interest in the property, either fee or easement, and to manage those lands as wildlife management area consistent with a focus on deer habitat. And again, in statute, deer wintering area projects shall be considered projects of statewide significance, part of the discussion that you folks just had relative to that category. Additional authorizations in Chapter 409 created the ability for the department to specifically allocate funding out of the Deer Management Fund, which is generated through a tagging fee associated with harvested animals, and to use that specifically for acquisition as well as management of those lands and development and management plan and everything it takes to to appropriately maintain the habitat on the landscape. It also allowed for the department to prohibit or limit feeding of deer, bear, moose, and turkey to promote the use of deer wintering areas by deer. Concurrently, as part of the biennial budget, the department was provided some additional capacity in terms of a resource biologist position. That position is currently advertised, and we expect to fill that as soon as we can, but typically it'll take a month and a half to 2 months to get through that process. We envision that that position partly will be focused on the acquisition efforts of these project areas, but also, once acquired, incorporated into the management of those lands moving forward. So the department developed 5 strategies or objectives to move this forward to help meet the goals of conservation under this statute. First and foremost, we wanted to identify the highest priority areas based a lot on the similar metrics that were in the 2011 bond language in terms of its location geographically, the size of the area, use by deer, connectivity, in the landscape context are all considerations that we're using. We did develop criteria to outline to our staff, how to assess these areas throughout the different regions of the state. And we have gone through that process, and we're continually developing additional project areas. But we wanted to identify and define what are the highest priority areas for the department in ideally the land for Maine future board to focus these efforts on in consideration of these projects that might move forward. The next step we've already started this process as well, is to engage with conservation partners to capitalize on some of their conservation efforts in the same part of the state. A lot of folks have been quite active over several decades in terms of working through and developing conservation projects with landowners in the state, and we want to capitalize on those relationships and hopefully some capacity as well. So we're prepared to engage with those conservation partners. The next step would be to engage with the landowners who own the property to determine whether or not they are interested in potentially willingly working through projects to help in this effort. One thing I'd point out is that obviously using public dollars, we need folks to be willing sellers, so there will be interactions with those landowners to help craft what that means to meet these objectives, but also to meet the needs of the landowners that we may be engaged with. Another point that I would like to point out is that this won't be a silver bullet in terms of deer habitat management in Maine. Maine is vastly privately owned, and it's still going to be critical to engage the landowners to allow them to incorporate management for deer and other species on their lands. It's a good question for you.
Yeah, maybe I missed it, but what's the consideration regarding easements versus fee? Will there be any easement activity associated with that would require obviously more effort on the departments to monitor those?
Yeah, I think, Jim, to answer that question, we haven't had those discussions in full. I think part of that would depend on the willingness of landowners and what their capacity is to either consider a fee sale or a potential easement sale. And that also begs the question, are other conservation partners and their nexus in terms of a conservation easement project? But that does create some need to discuss and be aware of that additional commitment to monitor and ensure that those lands are being managed consistently with a management plan for the property.
And just to follow up on that, the statute requires that the department manage the land. So that perhaps
precludes the
it limits, I think, some of the easement opportunities, because it does require the department holds a principal interest in the management, in the property, and in the case of easements, that we are responsible for the management on that property.
I could see
forest management on that property, right? I mean.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So you could imagine a situation where a conservation landowner owns land, they have a DWA on their property, and they're willing to allow IFNW to manage that portion of their ownership.
Right.
That's a scenario we could imagine happening.
It does create some complexities in terms of those interactions and how do you craft a project that would be successful and palatable to the landowner and the agency as well.
Costs, just staff costs of money.
I wonder if you have talked about the connectivity of various portions of forest lands. It's fine to protect the TWA, but the deer have to get there. And you mentioned conservation partners who are acutely aware of trying to connect swaths of forest. Is that something that you're looking at too?
That is a consideration, Barbara, that landscape context in terms of these project areas and how are they connected to either other conservation lands or, a lot of instances the department works actively with private landowners to ensure, habitat provisions on the landscape, and that's in that avenue as well. But we are looking at that landscape context and connectivity and, travel into deer wintering areas. That's also, I would say, a consideration in terms of the size of the project areas that we're looking at, because we are very much interested in managing deer habitat through the course of the year, not just specifically for winter shelter. Those summer habitat conditions, especially on the fringe of the year, in the fall as they start to stage into these yards, or in the spring as they bust out of the yards and head for summer range. Those are, there's certainly habitat considerations that you can put in place to help augment the ability for deer to function on those fringe seasons. And then summer habitat is beneficial because it increases the ability for the deer to, add calories to their diet and put them in a better shape into the winter. So that's an important consideration for winter survival for deer, as well as how much food are they getting in the summer months.
Brian, traditional deer yards that have been cut over, how are you prioritizing those? I mean, are they lost, or are we still looking at those as regeneration potentials? Or?
Yeah, very much. That's one of the benefits in Maine is that the forest does grow back. And we have that information. That's part of what we use to assess these project areas, Commissioner, is that we have historic deer yard information. So we know historically what was important for deer. And that's important from a landform context in terms of its capacity to produce winter shelter, the ground conditions and the soils that support those softwood stands. But also the landform, the aspect is a critical component. So these areas have historically been important for deer, and they would be in the future if managed to produce the habitat conditions to the benefit of deer.
Great, thank you.
And so again, we're not, and we have not yet engaged with landowners other than those that have come forward to the agency. And so we're considering some landowners have come forward. We're considering those areas, but we're gearing up to have detailed discussions and preliminary discussions with landowners to gauge interest and therefore drive some of the effort moving forward. If successful and we have willing sellers, we'll work to develop and submit grant applications to LMF as well as other funding sources. Commissioner Camuso mentioned some capacity on the federal funding side, and I'm sure that'll be a component of the funding that we look to bring to the table. And then we'll be involved in the acquisition process after that. I would say, as opposed to a kind of a shotgun approach to conserving deer wintering areas and deer habitat, we are trying to focus on fewer, larger areas to give us the capacity to manage that habitat successfully, both spatially and temporally. So we need to look at a larger footprint to allow us the ability to manage these lands over time, to continually have some parts of the area in regeneration, to have that mature softwood shelter for reducing winter severity within these stands, but also to provide that summer range or winter browse through hardwood management as well. So that's part of the consideration in terms of the use and the cover, as well as the landscape context. So under all of these bullet points here, in terms of the criteria we're looking at, we do have more information relative to what parts of the state we're looking at, very consistent with the 2011 bond language. The size, I talked about the larger the size is of interest to us for management purposes, but also from that, the cost, the cost benefits of having a more discrete, larger area to work with and to manage. Looking at the historic and current use of deer on the landscape, assessment of the cover conditions within a project area, and then that landscape context that Barbara had asked about. I looked to Bethany to make sure that I didn't miss anything on scale. So that was a very brief kind of description of what we're looking to do.
Is some of those criteria, are they dynamic in the sense that, I noticed key wildlife management areas weren't included, that if you had some sort of catastrophe in the wildlife population or weather changes or major events that cause problems, I think that can be modified to accommodate some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I would think we want to retain as much flexibility as possible, at least from the agency perspective, and from my perspective, the part of the staff that will be involved in managing and maintaining these and looking at additional acquisition areas. So I would like to see as much flexibility as possible, and I think we have it in that criteria.
And just to follow up on that, Jim, those are criteria that the department has established to help guide and prioritize our efforts to meet the goals of the statute. But those WMDs per se, those aren't in statute. We can adjust those. That's good.
I think I missed that nuance that you were talking about the wildlife management districts. Yeah.
So Ryan, in terms of next steps and follow-up, when the board sees the workbook, it will include this new criteria that IFNW is recommending to assist the board in prioritizing these projects, correct?
We have some thoughts. I think Bethany might be able to add a little bit of information in this regard. She's much more familiar with the workbook and works with it, day in and day out and things are active.
We have looked at that section of the workbook and we have some recommendations to make to the workbook as to how to incorporate what's in LD 404 directly into the workbook. So I can share that with you, Sarah, or
yeah, if you get
but it's things like under LD 404, it adds deer wintering area projects to be considered statewide significance of that section of the workbook. And then the remaining part related to deer in the workbook is really related to those connected goals. It has a lot of specific information about other applicants who qualify and the department providing information to those applicants that need habitat management. And LD 404 requires that IFNW manager of the property. So small adjustments like that.
the current law.
So,
Yep.
I think the point is really, if we just said we're gonna do the workbook in about 10 days, we're gonna do it.
Give it to
This is a
me.
pretty big piece to have to revamp.
I think IFNW's done the work. It's just like,
I would go back to my previous statement, can we get this done in that amount of time? We all want to meet that deadline, but this is a big piece. This is not a small tweaking language deal.
yeah, my sense is IFNW is just about ready to email it over to me and staff will incorporate it into and do the adjusting.
Kellen, I hope we're not gonna let perfect get in the way of good here. As far as, commission.
It's a good point.
Said, we've got to balance this, so.
Yeah.
But just put my other hat on, we're 90 days past adjournment, LD 404 statute. So we're bound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's not a lot of wiggle room.
Okay.
So I wanted to just do, okay, so what are we doing next? How is this all gonna happen? Kind of segue from Don's, like, we don't have a lot of time here. We gotta get this thing cracking. So prior to issuing a call for proposals, the board typically accepts public comment at a board meeting. So we need to schedule the next board meeting. October 4th has been floated. We can talk about that more, but that's what happens. The board votes to adopt the workbook, and that serves as the RFP to comply with state procurement and contracting requirements. Once adopted, LMF will post the workbook to our website and issue a public notice of the RFP. So for those that are listening, look on the LMF workbook, on the LMF website for that workbook in the coming weeks. And then we typically try to promote the opportunity. But one concept that's been discussed among myself and some of our partner organizations is the development of a 4-part workshop series that's recorded to include LMF staff, DSA, and applicants. This would be phased. We'd start very quickly on how to apply. So this would be a video that people could watch to understand what is this workbook thing, what does it mean, and how do you apply. A second phased approach would be efficiently managing your project. So how, okay, that workbook says this, what does that mean once my project's been selected? What to know post-award, and then celebrating our successes. And my hope is that we can be working on this quickly and finished within a year, 18 months, something like that, and having each of those videos done. So working currently with the Nature Conservancy and the Trust for Public Land, and I welcome, you know, participation or a subcommittee, a group that's looking to develop these from DSA staff, board members, as well as our applicant community. Email me if you're interested. So
I'm sorry, one thing just thought is, I mean, another approach that you've had success with is to just have a sort of a Facebook, not a Facebook Live event, but like a YouTube
Teams
kind of that gets recorded and then published. And then you could have a script with somebody asking you some questions. And it doesn't have to be as a formal, like a video production.
Yep.
Right. And maybe just have like we have once a month a coffee with the commissioner, coffee with the colonel, and the moderator has a series of questions and it just gets posted live and then it gets recorded and people can watch it. So
Yep.
It might be a simpler, less expensive way to do it.
Yep, we're definitely reviewing all of those approaches and resources available to us through the agencies and our partners. So, yep. I was trying to avoid another Teams meeting. I was trying to look for a venue that was not just another Teams meeting.
I think the point about don't let perfection get in the way of let's just find a way to simply do those type of things. I think that we do those type of training videos all the time for staff on different things. They're hardly fancy, but they work.
Yep.
So you don't need music in the background. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So that's our process. I didn't want to forget that. Recognize that we know that there's more work to do, and you know, I don't want to make this sound like we're rushing just to get something out the door, but no, we're actually thinking long term. We have developed some subcommittees from the work group process, and the board knows what those subcommittees are, what those topics are, and I think if you've been paying attention over the last year and participated in some LMF board meetings, you've heard about what some of those recommendations are. On the screen are the committees that we've recommended, the number of topics that they anticipate looking at, and we've had board members chime in on their availability or interest to participate on some of those. And I thought it would be useful to sort of get this kicked off to solidify the membership and request participation from the public so we can get those committees started, as Barbara alluded to earlier.
Okay. You done?
I'm done. I'm done, but this is an opportunity for members of the public who would like to participate on these committees to chime in now or email me after the meeting so that we can get things going.
Yeah, I would, and members of the public who are listening in now, I would ask anybody who is interested in these to please just email Sarah their willingness to participate in these particular committees are going to be critical going forward. I'm honestly, I'm more worried about if we're going to have an October 4 deadline, getting through the workbook to date, that we've discussed to date. Those things, I don't think there is any objection. I didn't hear any objection from the board members about that focus. I did hear from Barbara made a statement about the workbook committee needing to continue to work, and I would look to you and staff to continue on with those conversations aside from this meeting. And then I think we've got a path forward. So, which is great. So with that, I think the big question is October 4. I hear concern about October 4 for you.
I feel if everyone else can go with it.
I may have a conflict.
You may have a conflict.
Double check on
Okay. Do you want us to find a different day if you have a conflict, or do you want us to stick with the 4th? Maybe the three of us would then have a conversation prior to any changes.
that. Yeah, I think we can do that.
Okay. All right. So with that, with losing 2, we want to make sure that we have a strong participation for the rest of the board, so we don't lose a quorum.
Can we just check with Kathy?
Yeah. Can you put Catherine on the screen? Can you put Catherine on the screen?
I can stop sharing.
Hey. Okay.
Somebody's got a comment too.
Catherine, we were just wanting to check in with you about October 4th.
I'm available.
Okay, good. So let's stick with October 4th, and we can stay in touch with you on that date. Looks like, Sarah, there may be a comment in the chat. Can you highlight that?
I can't see that.
Yeah, I think it's probably been there. We have lots of comments. It looks like we're good. It looks like.
All right, so we seem to be good on public comment. We have an AOC meeting yet that needs to be determined, so that'll have to happen at some point where we get the AOC back together. We have an October 4 deadline. We've got a lot of work to do between now and then. I would ask staff if they do, in the process of developing changes in the workbook, if there are things that are problematic, highlight them early, so we can try to resolve them prior to the 4th. I don't think you should be, based on what you're talking about for updates. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
And staff will plan to email out, as I said, the workbook, and in that email, I'll highlight if there's any, big issues that need your attention. And Barbara, you'll have that opportunity to see it.
I was just going to say that would be helpful for me so that I could offer comment if I had any. And essentially, that's the meat of this next meeting for changes, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
I know you'll do your best, but the longer we have to read that, the better.
Yeah, we will do our best.
Yes.
Just one comment to say that from like the DSA perspective, very excited to be in touch with applicants and hear about the projects they're working on. We've already had some initial conversations about how to set up a process for fielding inquiries about sponsorship to be useful and efficient both for agency staff and applicants. I guess I would ask, now that we have a fairly short-term date set for next steps in defining the process and the details of the workbook, from my perspective, like building inquiries from property entities probably makes sense to wait until all of the details in the workbook
are available.
Set. So I really am looking forward to talking with you, but don't call Monday. Give us like 1 week to know where all the details are. But
okay. So message to partners is don't bother agency staff for 1 week.
Well, they need to understand what rules they're operating under, so it's very fair.
Okay. All right.
Move we adjourn?
We We have a motion to adjourn. Seeing no objections, I think we have consensus, so we can avoid a roll call on adjournment. Seeing that, thank you very much. It was a great, solid meeting. We've got a path forward. It's exciting, good stuff.
Oh, there's a hand raised by EM, a guest.
EM, last word.
Good morning. This is Ed Meadows here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, Ed.
I just want to commend the group on an extremely productive session today. I'm very excited about what you've accomplished. I just want to emphasize a couple points. One, anything we can do to simplify the workbook is effort well made. Secondly, I want to support the idea of the readiness concept. And finally, I'd like to offer my support and assistance in whatever way I might be able to help you.
Thanks, Ed.
Okay.
I'm just going to roll through these fabulous projects that staff have worked on closing out since the last call for proposals to help us celebrate all of our accomplishments. Because there have been a lot of really amazing accomplishments. And you know,
4 days.
Yeah, this one, man, this is like the miracle baby that like, this is a round 8 project. So this project has been out there and open for a long time. And Laura has got it closing in 4 days. So that's a major celebration.
Sarah, what's the time frame for all of these? Is it?
I would say, when did we do our last call for 2017?
Yeah.
2017
And this one being round 8.
was like
The title
2014.
policies, yeah, we're like 2009, so yeah.
So these have happened, the majority of them happened since 2017. Got to attend a really nice,
I'm sorry I couldn't go to that.
it was great, and they were very, very appreciative of the board. I can't tell you how much they appreciated LMF's involvement. And you should definitely go up and check. It does not look like that anymore. They have like converted that to a real waterfront park. It's pretty cool. It
Class
was
stuff, as I recall, was the class stuff. Didn't somebody say it's really going to class?
it was, they held the ceremony on the fly-in weekend, so it was really fun to see the planes coming in. Some really great projects. We're now in the projects that will close in a month or less. So there's a bunch of them staff have been working on.
You don't have lunch. I've already talked about how we're going to reflect. I thought I was going to have lunch as I drove out of here. That's a one of those fine print things. The statute for the
$5.
Where does the $5 come from?
Oh, like stop.
Just leave? Just leave it, stop recording? Oh, yeah. Yes.
I do waivers.